Okay, so we will begin our discussion, which is about contracts and all the wonderful things with that in this new normal of COVID-19. So I'll open the floor to whoever wants to get us started with questions or, concerns. I do have some things that Matt Schlesman sent me. He couldn't be here. He's going to try to join at the very end or later on. So if nobody raises their hand right away, I can start with Matt's comments to get us started. Anyone? All right, then Matt gets the floor, even though he's not here. So he had said that his concerns are language is inconsistent between contracts, which is to be expected, but can be a bit maddening through the epidemic, which is seen in the list of corresponding justifications. Excuse me. So I think we all have seen in the force majeure clause, you've got something specifically listed, but then you have kind of that catch-all clause of any other unforeseeable act that prevents, the performance from happening. And he says the obligations of a cancellation or rescheduling for this reason could be first addressed by either the talent reaching out to the venue or the venue reaching out to the talent. And he's experienced both, as I'm sure we all have with this COVID-19 situation. The questions he threw out: is it possible for all of us to use language to specifically deal with this kind of public health threat? Do we insert specific language and terms we want to see in every contract? And then he did give an example of kind of a boilerplate. I know for me personally, most of the contracts that I was dealing with have something like the force majeure kind of boilerplate language, which is, generally that, just to throw it out there, if either party is prevented from performing contract obligations due to illness, acts of God, and then you get your list of examples: fire, flood, accident, riot, order of any authority, extreme weather, and then you get your catch-all or any other legitimate condition beyond their control. So for me personally, I've had that in all of my contracts with the artists that I was dealing with this season. And again, once we kind of got to the point of the safer at home order and the government orders, I think it became slightly easier to justify that this is going to fall under the force majeure clause. But then I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit over the listserv too, that Dan from Hyder Center and I'm sure several others, also attach our own rider to every contract. And what I just read you is straight out of my own rider. So if, that's kind of for me a nice catch-all that if it's not in certain contracts, or some artists are self-represented, so their contracts are super simple, and as you're reading through contracts, it just may not be there. So for me, it's there in mine, and I attach that and ask them to sign that with the fully executed contract. And I can certainly share that, my template of that in the resources with this recording when I send it out, if that's of interest to people. But so that's kind of where I've seen. But I did also kind of listen into some of the APAP conversations that have been happening on their website and some of their Zoom calls. And some of the agents and artists have kind of said too, this might be a good opportunity for us to come together as an industry of agents, artists, presenters, to somehow streamline those contracts more, or get more of a generalized template so that some of these things aren't missed across the board. So I see Mary's hand up. Go ahead, Mary.
I have two comments, Lonnie. One is...
Mary, I can't hear you. Oh, hang on. Sorry, that's my fault. You go ahead.
Are you good?
Yep.
Okay. Two comments. One, I absolutely agree. I wish we could just all come up with some common language. Then there's the issue of some contracts have this in already and some don't. My bigger frustration is they all have that kind of standard list of things that are considered force majeure. But what happens after that for me has really varied from contract to contract. And some of them, honestly, the wording seems to only protect them. Like in the case of a force majeure incident, they're not obligated to perform, but it doesn't really say that we're not obligated to pay or that we get our deposit back. And that's the part where I was already at times, you know, writing in additional language, and I'm still going back and forth on one with a guy for next year, because I want to make sure that it equally protects both parties.
Right. Right. Michael?
I think that idea of everyone is different is one we got to keep in mind, because you know, every situation is different. I think one of the things that I found important is to put into the contract that if a force majeure is enforced, that the artist has to be present and able and willing to perform. Because if they just don't get there because of weather, that's not on me. I didn't choose to cancel it. But some of the contracts are written in a way that says I still have to pay them even if they couldn't get there to perform. Or that they got there and they were sick and couldn't perform, right? So that's one of the you know, one of the things that I think we have to be cognizant of.
Thanks, Michael. Jared?
Hey, folks. Just a couple quick things. One is, I think that Lonnie, you mentioned that you have a writer that you put with your artist contracts. We do too, and I highly advise everybody to have language hammered out that they like already, and add that to the contract. It doesn't just have to be, you know, redlining the contract that you get from the artist. And of course, that you mentioned also that some don't even have their own contracts, or they have very minimal contracts. But it's a cumbersome job, but it's also something that if you have all the language ready to go that you know you want to have in a contract, then that saves a lot of time while you're going through somebody else's, where you can say, well, this doesn't work for us because it only protects them, strike it. You know, those things are, it sounds easy to say that, and I realize that we're all dealing with our you know, trying to get through the contract process, but I think that that's what we can do to support each other, is not put up with someone protecting only themselves. Collectively, as our own group of presenters, that's something that we can do to help each other, is not tolerate that type of thing, and push back with our own language. If I may, I do have a thought. We talked about collecting together as an industry and with agents as well. This came up on a call that I had yesterday with the Arena Theater Network. And we were talking about how to do that, how to ignite that conversation between agents and presenters, so that we can get on the same page. And I'd like to put to the group that maybe WPN host an agent on a call soon for that express purpose. I have some thoughts in mind on who that is, but who that might be. But you know, people that we might, most of us, encounter over the course of our recent careers, that we all know and trust. But I would like to do that here. I think that'd be a great way to begin that discussion, and a great way to sort of spur that the relationship along.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, I'll note that. That's a really great idea, and I think that's a good, like you say, that's a good start to start the conversation. One thing I was going to add too is, you know, kind of the other reason for the like adding a rider. One of the main reasons that I did it too was language that for liability. You know, a lot of these artists come in with contracts saying, if I set fire to your stage, you can't hold me liable. Whereas, you know, I had to put in some language saying, you know, obviously accidents are covered by insurance, but then whose insurance covers it? And so, you know, there's also that protection too that you have to watch for in contracts as well. Stephanie and then Tiana.
Yeah, I've been talking to other performing arts centers too across the country. And one thing that even internally at the Widener we've discussed is that we not only have to worry about the stay-at-home orders, but if there's a limited, like no gatherings of more than X number of people, or if the time frame leading up to a performance is a window of stay-at-home order, like how do you justify being able to cancel an event? Because what if it's the following day after a ban is lifted, but you're not going to be able to sell tickets? So one sample that someone had thrown out there says the artist agrees that if a city, state, or federally mandated do not gather restriction is put in place within 10 weeks prior to the show, purchaser has the right to postpone the performance without liability under the normal force majeure conditions. So that's just another thing that internally we're going to have to discuss too. And do we incorporate that in our rider and everything?
Right. Thanks, Stephanie. Tiana?
Hi, guys. Something I'm also interested to see if you guys have in your added rider. So one of the unfortunate things that I had happen to me and still is happening is that the artist and the agent are going through a legal separation, and I did not know about it, and it started last September. And I found out because the artist was coming in March and was panicking of everything that's happening and was contacting me. Now, at Carthage, we had our risk management director deal with it because it got really out of control. And the agent was very good, and they look, we get it. We know this is not your fault. It's happening across the US. That we'll give back our portion of the deposit. The artist will not. And they believe that they're obligated to be paid anyway. So it's just something to add to the rider that if there is, it's not part of the force majeure, but if you guys have it in there, I'm just curious to know the language. If there is a legal separation between artist and agent, how does that protect the venue if things like this does happen? Because now we're dealing with two people and the artist is getting their lawyers involved. And it's just something that shouldn't be happening because we're all going through this. And I'm also curious about adding in the force majeure and our rider portion of it of our state, say if the scenario that our state of Wisconsin is on a lockdown or no events of a certain size, but the state the artist is coming from is not in that predicament, or vice versa, or they're on a travel ban and we're not. So just knowing what to do in the case of those scenarios of how do we still work together, can we reschedule? But I don't know about other institutions. It's really hard for us to reschedule and keep the deposits out there when we need those back because we need to plan other things, or if a grant or a sponsorship is covering it. I'm just not sure. So kind of in those predicaments.
Thanks, Tiana. Yeah, I know so much of this, unfortunately, there is no standard that we'll get to. It is going to be a case-by-case situation. And the thing, the other issue that you raised is costs of the deposit is meant to cover artist costs. And so some of the artists believe that they rehearsed for 5, 6, 7 months for this performance, and that is a cost to them. That is their time. And so, that's where their argument, I think, is coming from. They need to keep the deposit because they've invested their time to prepare for this performance, even though it's not necessarily tangible things like hotel rooms and travel, if that can all still be canceled. Because that's another thing I throw in my rider is, if the artist cancels on me, say last minute, and I've already bought food for their hospitality, I've already booked the hotel room, and my hotel's pretty good, but if for some reason I couldn't cancel it, if I've rented equipment and all of a sudden they don't perform, there's a lot of cost to me, which in my rider I put, you're gonna have to pay me back for that if you canceled. So there's all of those issues as well. Thanks for your comments. Mary, you are up.
Okay, just two things. One, I appreciated Stephanie's comment. I hadn't thought about addressing that issue if suddenly we can reopen, but we can only have 50 people in the theater. So thank you, Stephanie, for bringing that up. My other question, Lonnie, is when you attach your own rider, what if the language in your rider is in conflict with the one from the agent? How do you resolve that, or what supersedes what there?
I had that happen once where they, it was the hold harmless clause where it basically said they can't be held liable for any damage that happens in conjunction with the performance, or that their insurance wouldn't be held liable. And mine says, that the venue will not be held liable. And so what we ended up agreeing on in that instance is we basically, it was kind of a wash anyway, because my clause negated theirs and theirs negated mine. So they were happy with just striking both clauses. They wanted me to strike mine out of my rider. And I said, I can't strike mine unless you strike yours. And so that's what we agreed on. So then in theory, if something did happen and it came to a court of law, it kind of was a wash, and it would just be judged on, well, who was at fault, whatever the situation would have been. Because again, and that's one of those situations where if it happens to be my tech crew that, drops something and dents the floor or causes damage, that's my staff was at fault. Whereas, if the artist comes in and does something, and again, I think it also covers, even more so non-accidental things where the artist specifically comes in and starts spray painting my floor, and so there's, there's those things too. Yeah. And I'm always, whenever I send that and attach that rider, I'm always kind of wondering if something's going to come back. I would say 90% of the time it comes back signed, no questions, no issues. A lot of agents, I think, are used to seeing it now from presenters. I think more presenters are doing it. So I think as more of us keep doing it, it will become kind of the way that you can expect presenters to be protecting themselves. But yeah, there's been just a few times where it's, like you say, it's kind of been at odds. But usually, if you're dealing with good artists and good agents, I believe, then the contracts are simply meant to, be protective of all of us, and if there were some circumstance that caused damage, or that, with these cancellation issues, I think the contract is meant to just be able to be a negotiating point of, I think ultimately when we have these conversations with artists and agents, we want what's best for all of us. We certainly don't want to be keeping deposits and running to the bank and at the cost of an artist starving in the streets. None of us are in this for that. And I think if we approach these conversations with that level of grace and saying, I understand that, we're all in this together, and we keep saying that. And I think this is, when we talk about these conversations with contracts, it does truly become like, we all, I know you need your deposit back, but here's my reality and my financial situation. And so, it definitely becomes just having those, they're hard conversations, especially when you've got, agents or artists that are pushing back. But I think ultimately, if you can, when you're having those conversations, start from a place of, okay, I know you're struggling. I'm struggling too. We have to find the balance between my organization staying in business, your artist being able to eat, your agency being able to stay in business. We all need to find the win-win in it. So, and that's where it becomes very individualized, and maybe getting creative on, maybe you return half the deposit, or maybe, again, if you can't defer it to a rescheduled date, just trying to work with each other to find the best solution for everybody. And I think if there's always going to be those people out there that are, difficult to deal with. But I think for, most of our interactions, if we start there, and that is our ground that we're coming from, I think that will set a tone for having these conversations that will make them go a little bit better. But like I said, there's always people out there that are going to play hardball, and so we have to deal with that too. But thanks for all the comments. Who else wants to speak? I don't want to talk too much. I'm just the moderator, people. Paul.
Tiana brought up an interesting subject concerning the relationship between the artist and the agent. And as I review some of our clauses, they do talk only about the obligation to us with the artist. So if something did happen, are we all screwed?
Yeah, that's a really good thing too, because like, and that goes back to like when you start reading the top of the contract, where it says this agreement is between presenter, and then there's your name. And then sometimes it's like, I don't know about you guys, but maybe sometimes it is the agent and sometimes it is the artist. And, you know, so then you have who signed it too, the agent on behalf of the artist or did both. Cause yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. Let's see who was just raising their hand? Amy, right? Amy, are you up? No, who just raised their hand? I just lowered it. Michael, sorry, Michael.
We just have to remember that the contract is written, you know, it's got the normal parts, the offer, the considerations, and the relations, right? Those are the parts and signatures of agreement. But it's written to benefit the person that wrote it. So most courts of law will look at it if they wrote the contract, you get the benefit of the doubt, if that makes sense. So if they draft the contract, you may benefit from it, something that's unclear. Not always, but many times that's the way that things are interpreted. I've not had to take any contract to court. We're actually considering not doing any deposits because of this reason. I mean, I still have a $5,000 deposit due to us 2 years ago. We got a partial payment on it, which was about $150 or something like that, out of $5,200. So, yeah, deposits are a tough thing, and I understand that the artists and agents need them. But I think we're, you know, that's a piece that we are internally talking about and considering not issuing any. I already say that I can't do it except within the same fiscal year, so I can't do a contract for next year's artist until after July 1st. So I always say that deposits can't be done until August at the very earliest, and I try to move it later than that. But I also add a clause that, or 30 days after the receipt of a fully executed contract. Because sometimes we're a week away and I still don't have an executed contract. And I'm like, no, I can't give you any payment. I have to have that to submit for payment requests. So just a couple of extra thoughts.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Michael, just did you say you no longer issue deposits? Like, or what did you mean by that?
Well, we are actually in discussions to we're not allowed to do deposits.
Okay. Okay.
So that could be where we end up for the remainder of next year, especially given this, because right now I have 25,000, I think, or something like that from canceled performances this year.
Sure.
That, rescheduled, most of them. I still am missing beautiful. Stephanie, just nod if you've gotten a new date. Okay, that's right. Just a lot of
no. I pushed again today, so
I pushed again yesterday.
Okay, good. If we keep harboring on them, maybe they'll get to it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. And yeah, I for those of us I think that are in colleges and universities, it's also helpful because yeah, I do the same thing with my fiscal year. I tell them I can't issue any deposits before you know, the July 1st. So in this case, it's helpful because I don't have any deposits out. But again, depending on the timing of a pandemic, you know, that could still become an issue. There was a hand that went down. Did I miss it, or did you just change your mind?
No, it was Jared.
Okay.
Again, I was just going to say that we typically at Overture don't pay deposits. And that's in our offer sheet, that no deposit will be paid. Most of the time that flies, and sometimes it doesn't, and we make the choice at that time as to whether we will issue a deposit or not. On the other side of that, I would also mention that from a rental standpoint, I often don't require anymore a deposit because we're retaining all the funds from ticket sales anyway. So so long as there's no significant foreseeable outlay of cost ahead of time, then really we're just talking about making sure that the tickets, if they need to get refunded, they go back to the patrons, and that's the end of that situation as well. And I would also mention, by the way, that for those of you who are doing Broadway, it's not uncommon to not have a signed contract on a $1 million situation until a couple of days before, day before, day of. Sometimes it can be a little nerve-wracking, but it's not uncommon at all. And I think that the important thing to remember is that for the most part, everybody understands that we're just trying to get to an agreement. And that, of course, will be the thing that happens should it come to that, is that the court would say, well, what were you trying to do? What exists already? What was the intent?
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, I was listening to, if you guys are interested, on the APAP website, they have a couple of webinars that they had put up recently, and one of them was notes. It was Ask an Expert, Contracts, Insurance, Visas, Employment, and Legislation in the COVID-19 era. I can send the link for that. It's a YouTube, so it's very easy to access. And they talked about contracts specifically in the force majeure clause. And one of the things that they said as well is that what Jared was just saying, that even if it's not fully executed, if only one party has signed, and then we get into this situation where pandemic or shutdown or something, that it's still in a court of law is still, an intent. And so, even though you don't have a fully executed contract, it still is in a lot of ways, if you have an offer sheet, if you have communication that the intention was to have this performance and have this engagement, that it still is, it still counts. It's still all, kind of, I don't know, legally binding in a way. So that was interesting to me, because I could not handle booking Broadway. Like, my blood pressure would be way too high all the time. I try to get fully executed contracts before I even put a brochure together and publish the dates, because otherwise I have a panic attack. So, that would be tough on me. Let's see, who else has a comment?
I have a couple riders here from folks who, we had this discussion back in 2014 or 14. So I have 3 samples that I could also attach and send out if you'd like. Now they're from 2014, so they're probably not going to talk about a pandemic, but one from the Rife Center, one from River Arts, and one Baraboo, so from the El Ringling.
Michael, get the phone.
No. I just had to see who it was. It's one of my staff members. I'm like, no, I'm in a meeting. You'll have to wait. So anyway.
Thanks, Michael. Michael, if you want to just send those to me, I'll kind of combine them all into one nice document with the chat notes from this. And I'll also include my rider language, if that sounds agreeable to everybody, just so you don't have 5 million documents coming your way. I'll package it all into one nice little pretty box, and then you'll have it all at your fingertips in one document. So yeah, go ahead and email that to me, Michael.
Yep.
Let's see.
Can we go back to have a conversation about offers, and does everybody do a written offer?
Thanks. I was actually going to ask that too. And Jared, the idea of an offer sheet, like really, like makes my heart sing, because I love, you know, organization, and I don't actually do that. You know, for me, it's just a lot of email back and forth, but I think I like the idea of including already some of these things to protect ourselves in an offer sheet. So Jared, I don't know if you want to speak to that. And then also if you wouldn't mind, again, your template for your offer sheet, then I'll also include that in our lovely document that's forming here.
Certainly, I can. I'll send that over here shortly. Yeah, in the offer sheet, there are a handful of different things included in there. Expiration dates on the offer are fairly important. I've had to put that into play a few times. I've had offers that were accepted after the expiration date on my offer, and information had come to light that I said, I'm sorry, that expired a couple of days ago, so I'm no longer able to have this engagement take place. And I've been able to rely upon some of those things in circumstances where it was necessary. There are other considerations like some of the radius clause type stuff that we would ordinarily put in a contract. I put those in an offer sheet as well, just to make sure that those getting involved understand some of the scope of what they're getting into. But I can certainly send over our offer sheet in the chat here shortly. Unfortunately, I'm on my phone and my computer, so I'll have to do it in a minute.
That's really fine. Or if you just want to email it to me, if that's easier, like I said, I can combine it.
Sure, I can do that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can just combine it in. Thanks, Jared. Yeah, that's a really good point too, because, you know, you go through all this back and forth, and then maybe you get to the point of a contract and all of a sudden there's a deal breaker in there, like a radius or something. And it's just like, oh my gosh. So yeah, I kind of like that, having some kind of form up front as well.
I would add one thing, Lonnie, and that is, I just lost it now. One of our requirements is that everybody has to provide a taxpayer ID, so a W-9. So I put that right up front in the offer as well, so that we must have that for every entity who will receive payment. It's also a place that I include the Wisconsin non-resident entertainer income tax requirement and refer to, and I usually attach the publication from the Department of Revenue about it, you know, and say that we will withhold this and this. So that becomes part of the offer and is in the document.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, that's a good point too. I always send the W-9 with the contract, because otherwise, you know, when I'm trying to cut the check, then I'm chasing it down, and it's nice to have that up front, have it in the file, just pull it and go. Go ahead, Mary.
Pretty much the same thing. I think I've been asked for an offer letter probably for 75 or 80% of our bookings. They've asked me to send an offer letter, and it includes a lot of the same things that the other guys just said. Obviously, very specific on the date, time, location, what the offer is, but we add in a lot of the same things: the non-resident tax, the radius clause, the merchandise split, and even what we are agreeing to provide in terms of hospitality and housing. It's all just laid out there up front, and then if there's a question, they come back and question it before the contract even gets written.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, great stuff, you guys. Does that kind of, if that kind of answers some of the offer stuff, I kind of wanted to shift gears just a little bit. So if anybody else has anything on that, speak now. Otherwise, one of the other things that I think is good for discussion is the idea of, okay, I contracted a $10,000 artist, and now I'm going to try to reschedule them into the fall, but I'm not sure now I can afford a $10,000 artist. And what happens if I'm, changing my mind on the artist fee? Or I think somebody brought that up in an email that, maybe you don't want to reschedule even if the artist is pushing you to, because moving into what's going to be our new normal with, already starting in fall, I just, what are ticket sales going to look like? Are we going to be able to, my whole budget is out the window. What my projections and everything, I know I'm not going to get the attendance that I was hoping to, especially because now I'm going into my 25th season. So I was very optimistic on what I thought my attendance would be and pulling people back, and, you know, and so that's all of that's going to change, which is also, I'm already discussing and thinking about ticket price, you know, and I think we've talked about that too. I was going to raise ticket prices, but now I can't. So based on everything that's going to be the fallout of this for the next, who knows how long, what happens with contracts or decisions that were made based on a non-COVID-19 world that now are entering into a COVID-19 world. So I have Diane and Stephanie. Diane, you unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. We're kind of in the same situation as you. It was going to be our 25th season we were celebrating, so we went out on a limb with prices, and we have a $10,000 show in September. And I reached out to him because I wanted to reschedule, and of course they didn't really want to reschedule this early, but he dropped down to way less than that 10 and said, if we could do that and then cover your expenses and then split the difference, would that be okay? Could we keep it in September as long as things worked out for September? And I haven't accepted that yet, but perhaps your $10,000 show would do the same. On the flip side of that, I have another one of that much, and they just don't want to talk about anything right now because things can change by later in the fall. So, but maybe you could just talk to that entity. Mine was really pleasant and understood the situation and didn't want us to be out on a limb any more than they wanted to be out, but they did kind of want to go forward if they could, or they'd reschedule in 21, 22. So that was nice to know as well. That's all.
Thanks, Diane. Stephanie?
Yeah, we haven't gone back and like renegotiated contracts or anything, but I have heard that that's probably likely a lot of shifting to lower guarantees and back end splits on shows. Again, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at our pricing and stuff like that too. But I think the next round of contracting, like for 2021, 22, we'll probably see a different kind of approach from agents and artists, because again, if they want to keep working, they're going to have to be mindful of the venues that have taken a hard hit in the last year as well. So I think there's probably going to be a little bit more cooperative effort in the next year, hopefully. But
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Any other thoughts? Anybody have any like major pushback from agents, or, you know, any horror stories? I think in this specific situation, we're fortunate that, you know, everybody's dealing with the same thing. So everybody's being very understanding, you know. There in the future, there may be other situations that aren't necessarily so worldwide, and then you might, you know, I think we'd be running into more issues with trying to interpret the clauses of our contracts. Josiah, go ahead.
I wouldn't say this is a horror story, but I'm dealing with a classical artist and agency that it's kind of becoming a kind of a pain in the ass, excuse my French, because I had to look at their contract about 3 times, and the phrase act of God was part of it. And I said, okay, due to the fact of the pandemic and the act of God, we're not going to pay anything. And then they went back and said, well, could you pay a percentage? You know, because there's these other venues that are doing it. I'm like, but those other venues are probably bigger than us, and they probably have a little more funding than we do. So it's like, no, we're going by what you're saying. So I'm going back and forth with the agent who is now in the Netherlands because she had to leave New York. And so now I'm like, what should I do? And Joe Furlow and I had that conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still like, do we pay a percentage just to say screw it, or do we go buy the contract and say this is an act of God, we're not going to pay, you know, this dollar amount or this percentage for it?
Jared? No, you're muted.
Sorry. I just wanted to offer solidarity. We've had a couple of those circumstances so far, and I think that ultimately it's a matter of what kind of relationship do you have with the agent, and if you're not able to pay it, if the agent understands that you're not able to and you'd love to, and whatever, that's how sometimes you just can't follow everybody else. And I also would hesitate to think that this person telling you that all these other people or everybody else is paying them, why can't you get on board? Maybe.
And if everybody else is paying them, well, great. Then they've got what they need. So I'll bow out.
You got it.
So glad they're blessed, Michael.
We also have to remember that the artists are taking huge hits here too, right? This is not us alone. Small budgets is one piece of it, but if you're having to cancel an artist or reschedule an artist, is there a way that you can somehow keep their deposit till next year? Or is there some way to still help them? Because we're in this together. We got to try and remember that. So of all those 25,000 in deposits I have out, I think they're all keeping it for the rescheduled date next year. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, And honestly, if you have it's a $7,000 artist, Josiah, and not paying it, are they going to take you to court over $7,000? If it's a $50,000 artist, maybe it costs them that much in legal fees, unless they decide they want to make an example of you. I mean, so be thinking about that too. What is your ultimate risk?
Thanks, Michael. Mary?
Fortunately, I haven't had any horror ones. I did have two that also required some negotiation, and one was honestly just a school time matinee, so it was not a very expensive show, and the deposit wasn't a lot. And the deposit actually was due March 29th, but we closed and canceled before that. And when I emailed him about rescheduling next year, or scheduling a different show, I think, I was thinking we had done a deposit, and I said, how are you handling deposits? And he replied and said, I don't think we received one from you, but could you maybe send it as a cancellation fee? And I emailed him back and I said, I think by your contract, we're not subject to a cancellation fee. I said, and honestly, we have like zero income right now and all these tickets to refund. So no, I can't. And he just replied, understood. I think he just felt like he had to ask. What can he lose by asking? I said I couldn't. He accepted it. We booked for next year. There was another one though that was one of our more expensive musical acts. We'd already paid the first deposit. We had a second deposit due, and it wasn't small. It was over $3,000. So for me, that was significant. And when we realized we were going to have to close and canceled, I had just mailed the check, and I actually stopped payment on it because I was worried about getting it back. And the contract clearly said I was not obligated. When I called the agent to give her a heads up that I had done that, although it had actually been sent to the performer, the first one went to the agent, the second deposit went to the performer, she was like, oh my gosh, I'm so disappointed you did that. And he already paid for all these plane tickets. And I'm thinking, pretty sure they're going to get that credited back from the airline, but really tried to lay a kind of a guilt trip on me. And I said, well, I'm really sorry, but again, we may have to refund all these people's tickets. I can't afford to pay this. And in the end, I ended up rescheduling with them. So the first deposit we made will be applied and we won't owe another one for a while, but she did kind of push back. And I just felt we couldn't do it. And eventually we, came to agreement. So I think it is a case-by-case basis and what you really can do and how much you want to be able to go back to that person later.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mary. If there's no other comments kind of along that line, I can move in a different direction, but go ahead, Michael.
So is anybody else concerned about having a season done next year already and then moving all of your reschedules into next year, and then not being able to have large group assemblies? So I'm kind of freaking out here. I have five public performances that were moved on top of what we already have in our full schedule. And I mean, I was able to do it with our school series because that wasn't all finalized yet. So I've taken things out that weren't confirmed. But is that a concern that others have in terms of, are we gonna have a glut of product out there that's gonna make it, nobody's gonna sell any tickets?
Thanks, Michael. That was the direction I was going to move in.
Great, glad I could help.
And that's kind of my concern too, is more so what I have booked for next year, which is not necessarily subject to force majeure, because everything that I had to finish out this season, it was only a few, and they were smaller acts. And so what we decided, I just outright canceled. I didn't reschedule any, with the intent that, because my season was pretty much done. So I said, I can't really move you into 2021. So my intent was that I would rebook people in 21, 22, which obviously I wasn't going to talk dates at this point. So we kind of just did outright cancellations. But like everything, like I said, that I have booked now in my 2021 season, you know, as it stands, like I'm not going to change it, but it is my fear of, like, I'm not going to get the ticket sales. I don't know how people are going to feel about coming out, you know, and sitting together, you know, in a theater shoulder to shoulder. So I think, cause yes, especially in the fall, you know, whenever this is lifted, my first show is in September. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know what kind of ticket sales I'm going to have. So, I mean, I'm looking down at next season that, if it happens and we don't have to start canceling into September and October and, oh my gosh, you know, or rescheduling the reschedules, you know, if best case scenario, we're back up and running, you know, how comfortable are people going to feel, you know, coming out, and are they going to be ready? And I, you know, my gut feeling is telling me, be prepared for a kind of lose your shirt season. And, you know, it's just going to be part of reality. But again, I don't think I'm going to be alone in that. And I think it's still going to be, you know, arts organizations, movie theaters, some of the things that really gather people together in a way that you can't necessarily sit even 4 feet apart, is going to be challenging. And I think we're going to feel the fallout of it for quite a while, not to be gloom and doom, but yeah, that is definitely one of my concerns at the moment. Michael, did you want to add?
Yeah, I don't know if you're following this, but Major League sporting events and everything else, they're starting to remap their stadiums and arenas, with socially distanced audiences. So, you know, how are they keeping that 6-foot dimension between people? We've started some conversations even internally. Back to school performances in the fall, are principals and teachers going to be able to take field trips into a group setting? And then how could we socially distance between groups, at least, so that we have this 6-foot radius around group A or group B or whatever. So it means our capacities are going to go out the window, and our potential for revenue, of course, out the window with it. But those are, I mean, school performances for me is that's 25,000 kids in a year for me. And that's huge. That's a huge change. If that capacity gets cut in half, you know, that's something to really, I don't know, try and figure out, I guess.
Thanks, Michael. Jen.
Just to add in the perspective of the marketing director on all of that too, one of the things that is a concern for me as I start to plan with our usual events, what would be our usual events plus all the rescheduled events, is that's going to stretch the marketing dollars, because now I have additional events that we're going to have to market, and perhaps market or would have wanted to market more because it's a rescheduled date and people may not have expected it to be there. So that's just something that we're thinking about. In addition to potentially having to socially distance people, it's also the added expenses of extra performances. And we may have to get a little creative with how we market because we may not be able to do some of the traditional paid things.
Right. Yeah, and then the question coming down the pipe is, you know, you've got, like you say, we're kind of already probably have saturated ourselves for the fall. And, you know, you wonder how that's going to impact attendance, as Michael said. And then, you know, God forbid, this does go further on and we have to start canceling into, you know, September, October. I mean, do you reschedule things to the spring, or do you reschedule to the following fall just to try to give yourself even a bigger buffer? I've already thought about that as a you know, worst case scenario. If this goes further in and I'm looking at my September and October shows, I don't know that I would reschedule them into the spring, because then too I'm oversaturating my season and it's all concentrated then within 4 months. So I think for me, my decision would be, let's move it to fall of 21, and then my season would more kind of run from January to December, then my 25th celebration season. You know, just kind of move those that way versus, you know, put where I had 4 artists in 4 months, have 8 artists in 4 months. And because again, I just don't know if that's just going to be too much for people. Tiana, you're up.
Yeah, so I had a meeting with my boss this week, and because I don't know if you've been reading the news, but there is a couple of private schools across the U.S. that is looking at not coming back in the fall. And so, I mean, we won't find out about that until nearly August. So I've been contacting a few artists because I did get one canceled in September. There's too many unknowns, and getting the students back, hopefully, is going to be a huge change for us. And they understood, and we're looking at 21, 22, obviously not looking at dates. The other one is, we just did this week, is I have 2 in October, and one of them was because they have so many dates getting rescheduled for fall because of spring being canceled, they needed to change our date. So that opened up the window of, can we do this in 21, 22 instead? So it's unfortunate that we're lighting our next year's season for the guest artists, at least, just because we can't take another hit of having to cancel everything, reschedule or not reschedule. And so we have a lot in the spring right now, but also we're looking at, is there something we can put in the brochure that helps give a little bit of ease to patrons, that we're doing everything as possible that we can do to help with their feeling safe at our campus. So what does that look like? You know, we'll take a hit on all of our attendance, but do we take what we usually do and cut it in half? And then do we add a few extra dates because of that? Just so we can social distance. So if it's reserved seating, killing seats in between each other so they can't reserve it, and then we have to spread them out. So we're just trying to look at all measures. I think we're just trying to look at the worst case scenario if we don't come back. And then the other one is, if we do, how do we make everyone feel comfortable at that point?
Right, exactly. And then Brock mentioned here in the chat, and then, you know, we also are looking at lobby areas. Some of us, especially with historic theaters, have very small lobby areas to begin with. You know, how do you know, even if you can show, you know, block off certain seats and do that within the theater, you know, how do you handle bathrooms and lobbies that can sometimes get very tight, even with a minimum amount of people in your own theater? So that's, you know, those are all things that we get to navigate. So much fun. Mary.
I have a question, and I just asked my building person to look into this, is for us all to watch and let us know if you see anything about any requirements that might be made for venues like ours in terms of cleaning and disinfecting before we open and after we open. I happened to talk to someone who runs a summer kind of resort cabins, shared bathrooms and things. and they've already received instructions on, you know, from their industry on the extra cleaning requirements and what's going to be required when they do open. So I think if any of us come across anything like that about any CDC requirements to reopen or what we're going to have to do in terms of more frequent cleaning and stuff when we open, that would be important information for everyone to have. I haven't looked for it and I haven't seen it specifically yet.
Thanks, Mary. Michael said in the chat that CDC has guidelines out there and IAMVM does as well. Michael, if you're aware of any links or anything, feel free to, if you don't add them to the chat in time for this meeting, feel free to email them to me and I'll also add them to our resource document that's forming with this meeting. Tiana?
Well, speaking of contracts and taking a little bit of a different direction, just looking at our ticketing licensing. I know ours gets renewed soon, just seeing if anyone else is, I don't know, I'm having conversations with Sabo and it's just, I get where they're coming from, you know, and they can't prorate or anything like that, but I mean, we're already taking a hit of losing 2-3 months. And then if fall doesn't happen, there's another 6 months and we're not even using the services at that point.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, and I just got my annual shortfall notice, which was not surprising. Oh, I got a package. FedEx is outside my door. Yeah, and so, you know, yeah, I had to refund so many tickets. So that goes back into that subtracts from how many tickets I sold. And so now I owe that to Sabo, which is really kind of annoying. And like you say, that's going to be another cost impact because I don't know about those of you that have Sabo, I have that minimum agreement where if you don't sell this many tickets, they charge it back to you. And so that's what I'm dealing with right now. And I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I should push back on it. I literally just got it yesterday, I think. And I've just been kind of thinking about, do I reach out and say, hey, can you work with me on this? Because obviously it's an impact too as well. That's a whole nother discussion. Yay. Well, we're at 12 o'clock, so we've been in this for about an hour. So I think maybe we've had a lot of really, really great discussion, and I know I have a lot of things to wrap my brain around. And once I get all the information combined, that'll be some good things to meditate upon for quite a while. So unless anybody else has any, really big things they want to cover, I think we'll wrap it here. Go ahead, Josiah.
Just one thought. Has anyone kind of considered not even having a season at this point? Unfortunately for me, I have pretty much everything contracted for next year, but after what Kim said about Live Nation, talking about 2 days ago, saying that there might not be live entertainment until the fall of 2021, has anyone had that scary thought of going back and saying, let's not even have a season? Unfortunately, that would just be a massive income hit, and I'd be afraid to see so many art centers kind of crumble because of it. But has anyone thought of that too? Yeah, that might be jumping the gun, but at the same time, it's a thought that we have to have because the school districts are having that same thought right now, and do we have to consider that as a possibility? That's just a thought.
Yeah, thanks. I know semi-related kids from Wisconsin had to cancel their entire season. They're just not operating for this summer because they're right in the midst of impossibility. So I'm not sure how that's going to impact them as an organization. So that'll be interesting to watch the fallout of that. Mary, go ahead.
Just before we sign off, Lonnie, I want to say, and I'm sure this is on behalf of everyone, thank you, Lonnie, for organizing these meetings and for taking all the notes and sending out all the follow-up. You're doing an amazing job. I value this group more than I ever imagined I could. So thank you, Lonnie, for everything you're doing to keep this all going and keep all of our thoughts shared and all of our documents and all that from everybody.
Thank you, Mary. It's been a true joy and blessing to be able to serve this group in this way. And you know, organizational skills are my forte, so I'm very pleased and happy to do it. So, but thank you. I appreciate the vote of confidence and the encouragement. So yeah, no, and this has been, you know, mutually beneficial. I do think that these conversations are great for us. I'm so glad that the idea came out of in lieu of us being able to get together for the WPN conference to do this. And so as long as I'm still here and, you know, doing stuff, we'll keep it going. And I think, you know, out of each of these, now that we've gotten them started, this is our second, you know, we're getting more and more topics and things to discuss out of these. So we'll definitely keep it going. And thank you. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. So, okay, I am going to go ahead and stop the recording then.